Welcome to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury.
Hello and welcome back to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury, the show that helps individuals and small business owners fight back when the IRS comes calling. Lance Drury is a seasoned tax attorney who's been defending clients for over 20 years with one goal in mind: protecting what matters most. I'm Evan Mack, and this is Trust Fund Recovery Penalty Appeals, Fighting Personal Liability. Lance Drury, sir, welcome back.
How you doing, Evan? It's always great to see you.
I'm hanging in there, baby. I'm hanging in there.
Well, great. That's good to hear.
Lance, let's start from the beginning. What is the trust fund recovery penalty, and who does it apply to?
Okay, well, the trust fund recovery penalty comes into play when you have unpaid payroll taxes. So it's against small business owners for the most part. And so what happens is when you have unpaid payroll taxes, you're normally going to have a revenue officer involved in your case. And what he's going to want to do is he's going to want to interview you to see if the trust fund recovery penalty should be assessed against you personally. And they assess that against whoever owns the business plus works in the everyday operations of the business. Now, if you're president of a company, you have a fiduciary obligation to know whether or not your taxes are being paid or not. So it doesn't matter if you don't have actual knowledge. Every owner, I have that obligation here, as the owner of this law firm.
Right.
But here's the thing. They want to come in and they want to interview your clients. None of my clients submit to that interview. And the reason is the statute to find that you're a responsible party for purposes of asserting the trust fund civil penalty is identical in almost all regards to the federal statute for tax evasion. So the last thing I want to do is send my client in there to confess to a felony.
Right.
And so none of my clients go in, and they don't need to know that. And the reason they don't need to know that is when it's a small company, they know who's responsible. It's the owner.
Yeah.
Now, they may try to get other people in there because if you sign the company checks, they could assert the trust fund against you because they assume that you had knowledge that the payroll taxes weren't being paid. So that can insulate other people from having the trust fund asserted against them if the owner doesn't submit to that trust fund penalty interview. And the significance of that, Evan, is now your personal income and your personal assets are at risk. Now, it's not an additional tax, but it's derived from the payroll tax. It's the 50 to 60% of the payroll tax that's attributable to the employee. They consider that you're holding those funds in trust for the employee, and that's the theory about them coming after you personally. So if you have $100,000 of payroll tax and $60,000 worth of trust fund, you still only owe $100,000. And for every dollar you pay down on the trust fund, that's a dollar less that needs to be paid on the payroll. So we generally tell our people to pay the trust fund down first if they have the ability to do it. If they don't have the ability, then we can negotiate a settlement for them. But if they do have the ability, because their personal income and their personal assets are at risk, as long as the trust fund civil penalty is outstanding.
So why does the IRS pursue these individuals, not just businesses, in these cases?
Because a lot of times the businesses go belly up. Everybody thinks owning your own business is the American dream, but a lot of small businesses don't make it. So then they come after you personally for the trust fund. So at least they get some of their money back, 50 to 60%, then they can potentially come after. And so that's why that's one of the reasons I think they do it. But it's just another way for them to get their monies back. Now they're not looking at the business assets or the business income. In addition to that, they're now looking at your personal assets and your personal income. So that's why they do it. There's another pot there that they can go after to try to get their money back.
How does the IRS determine who's the responsible party? What criteria do they use to determine that?
Well, there's a whole sequence of questions. It's a
Mhm.
form. I can't remember off the top of my head the number for the form, but they ask what they did in the business, what they were responsible for, who signed the checks. Is there anybody else they should be talking to, or who was involved in the operations of the business? And so it's those types of questions that they're asking. And so nobody should submit to that trust fund penalty interview for the reasons that I alluded to earlier, because it tracks almost identical to the federal statute for tax evasion.
Hmm. But once the IRS proposes this trust fund recovery penalty, what happens next? How much time does someone have to respond?
I don't remember off. I know there's an assessment. I think it's either 30 or 60 days that you
Okay.
have to respond to that. And if you don't, then they're going to assess the trust fund. Uh, and you normally don't have a whole lot of grounds to contest it because,
Hmm.
like I said earlier, we all know who the responsible party is when it's in a small business. It's the owner, it may be other people, but by not
Right.
submitting to that interview, you might be able to insulate other people from being held liable for that trust fund.
But what are the most frequent mistakes individuals make when they're trying to fight or maybe disregard that TFRP assessment?
Well, if you disregard the assessment, then they can come after your personal assets. They can levy your
Oh
bank
wow.
account. They can take 90% of your take home pay. So you do not want to ignore those notices from the IRS. And, you're not going to be able to do this on your own. I have seen so many people who just thought they could do this on their own and they just made their matters worse. In fact,
Hmm.
I have people all the time that come to me, and this is how I know the IRS takes advantage of lay people. They call the IRS, they set up an agreement, they thought they could do it on their own. They come see me, and the first words out of their mouth are, I can't afford the monthly payment. And I go, then why did you agree to pay it? And they go,
Yep.
well, this is what they told me I had to pay. I said, that's not true. It's all based on your ability to pay it back.
Mhm.
85 to 90% of my clients never pay back the full amount. 10 to 15% never pay a dime.
Wow.
And so you need professional assistance when you do this. Evan, I got to tell you something. This is hard to believe, but this is gospel. When I was a small town lawyer, 15 hours a year of continuing legal education.
Wow.
Now, myself and my 8 other attorneys throughout this office, we spend a minimum of 50 to 100 hours or more a year
Wow.
just keeping up on this. So
Hmm.
here's another side tip. I tell everybody, if you don't hire me, there's 3 rules. You hire an attorney that does this every single day. Do not hire an accountant. We have seen accountants put tens of thousands of dollars on the books for their clients. Why? Because they don't know how to deal with the IRS. 90% of what they do is tax preparation. And the biggest mistake those accountants make, if somebody has 10 years of unfiled returns, they'll have them file them all. And you
Wow.
only, in order to be compliant, have to do the last 6 years. So if prior to 2019 there was no liability on the books, you're self employed, you never made estimated tax payments, guess what? You file those returns, you're going to owe tens of thousands of dollars to the
Wow.
IRS. So you don't want to do that. Go local and don't hire one of the big boys. There's a lot of scam artists out there. And so you got to watch who you hire in this area.
But Lance, can you describe kind of the process of appealing maybe this trust fund recovery penalty? Is it a formal process or is there something else that goes
Now, I
into it?
believe that there's a paperwork that you can fill out and you can file with the revenue officer. I'm not so sure whether or not you can go to U.S. tax court over that. We don't do a whole lot of those kinds of appeals because, frankly, we know who the responsible party is, and we're not going to file an appeal if it's frivolous just to file the appeal. So we don't appeal a lot of those determinations, except when they come after somebody that really didn't have any dealings with the business or wasn't in the operations of the business or had no knowledge of what was going on.
Hmm. Hmm. What kind of evidence and strategy are most effective when appealing this?
Well, you gotta have proof that your client wasn't involved in the
Mm,
operations of the business or didn't have a fiduciary obligation to know. So any officer of a business, any member of an LLC is going to be a responsible party because they had a fiduciary obligation to know that the taxes weren't being paid, even if they didn't know that the taxes weren't being paid. So it's kind of hard to come up with any documentation to refute this on appeal. That's why we don't do too many appeals in this area.
But Lance, if someone is already paid or is on a payment plan for a business debt, can they still be personally liable for the remaining amount?
They can and they will come after you,
Wow.
particularly if your installment agreement is for less than the full amount.
Wow.
So then they will come after you personally for the trust fund recovery penalty, hoping to get some more monies out of you that way. And again, as I said earlier, a lot of these businesses go belly under. There's no assets left, there's no income left in the business. So that's when they're really going to come after you for the trust fund recovery penalty.
Hmm. So, Lance, what's your message to business owners or managers who have just received this TFRP letter from the IRS?
Call me. Call me, Evan, because we can help you out. We have more than 1,000 clients. We're a 4.7 out of 5 in St. Louis on Google reviews. We're a 4.9 out of 5 in Nashville. We keep growing the business. We're soon going to have another office in Houston, Texas, because in early September, my LA attorneys are going down to San Antonio to run that office. So we're going to open another office in Houston. So we're going to keep going. We've helped a lot of people out, but I think I have a moral obligation to help as many people as possible. And I'm going to keep doing that as long as my mind and my body permit.
Absolutely. But before I let you go, I was thinking in general though, Lance, sidebar, do you think our process, how we handle taxes in this country, do you feel like it's the best it can be? You know, as far as like how everyone does it like across the world, how do you feel that we do it here? You know what I mean?
Well, that's a tough question. I've thought about the flat tax and that everybody should pay some amount. I mean, you got to realize that half the country doesn't pay any taxes. Uh, and some of that's either because they're retired and don't make enough money or they're working and don't make enough money.
Mhm.
Uh, that's a hard question for me to answer, Evan. Things could always be more equitable. Uh, you know, it, it's it's a tough deal.
Mhm.
And here's the problem with small businesses. And I can see a lot of times it's not really their fault that they got into this situation,
Mhm.
either because of bad economic times or what happens a lot is somebody goes belly up on them and doesn't pay their bill.
Yeah.
And so to keep the business going, they pay their suppliers, they pay their employees, they think they're going to catch up next quarter with Uncle Sam on payroll taxes, and it just snowballs.
Mhm.
And the other thing is, a lot of my clients, they're very good at what they do. But when you're self-employed, there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of things that you have to know in order to run that business successfully. And a lot of my clients don't have that. I had a woman once said she learned more about how to run a business after she had her problem with the IRS and came to me helping her get straight and the things she needed to do in the future to stay compliant.
Mm.
So if you're thinking about being self-employed, I'm sure you can Google what you need to know in terms of regulations, paperwork, all that, and you ought to be able to take classes online because it's everybody thinks it's the American dream to be self-employed, but it's a lot more work, and I have people that work long hours for little money, and the last thing they want to do at 7, 8 o'clock at night when they get home is paperwork.
Yep.
So before you become self-employed, you better think long and hard if that's the route you really want to go. And it takes a different kind of animal. I'm a different kind of animal, Evan, because to be an entrepreneur, you got to carry all this risk. You got to go through the bad times. For example, during the pandemic, Evan, the IRS stopped levying people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? After a few months of the pandemic, I didn't make any money because that's when I was losing money. But thank God I had enough money to pay my people and to keep this business going, because a lot of people during the pandemic, they had to shut their doors, as you
Absolutely.
well know. So
Absolutely.
think about this long and hard if you want to go into business for yourself.
Lance, sir, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Evan. Can't wait to see you again. I always enjoy it.
I know it's going to be great to hear about your trips. It's going to be good stuff.
Yep, sounds great.
Thank you all for listening to Resilience and Resolve. If the IRS is coming after you personally for payroll tax debt, do not panic and don't go at it alone. Visit lancedrurylaw.com. Find out how Lance and his team can help you fight back. And if you found this information helpful, please like, subscribe, and comment, and share it with someone else so they can find it helpful as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.